Welcome. Today our show is called From Hell to Heaven, Healing Troubled Marriages. Our guests today are Christina and Joseph Bringas, who are coordinators of the single most effective intervention for troubled marriages in the world. And the name of that ministry is called Retrovi. Welcome.
Good morning.
Thank you.
So happy to have you on the show this morning. And it actually, you have to be pretty courageous to come on and talk about your own troubled marriage, which is one thing we're going to do today. So how long have you guys been married?
16 years this December.
16 years,
Yes.
Okay. So long enough to know better, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so when did you first sense that your marriage was in trouble, and has it been smooth for a relatively long period of time?
Well, in my opinion, in our first year of marriage, we got married at a very early age in our relationship. We only dated for 3 months, and we got married right away. We somewhat eloped, and we moved to Southern California. And I say within our first year because I started to look for the attention of female relationships, and we did have an experience within our first year of marriage that resulted in our first separation.
Okay. Christina, from your perspective.
You know, I think that he's right. We did marry very young and very inexperienced, and not understanding really what the real commitment and what the sacrament really meant. And so having said that, with the decision that Joseph had made very early on to have a relationship outside of our marriage, I did learn after, being a part of the ministry that what really deteriorated the marriage from my perspective was the fact that after that decision was made in his part, I continued to live the rest of our relationship with unforgiveness. And that was a very difficult thing because it's a huge contributor to the deterioration of our relationship.
So what was the first sign of trouble? Was it, a lot of times people will say, well, the reason that you would have sought affection elsewhere was because things weren't working in your own marriage. I mean, can you really say that, or is it totally your responsibility from that perspective?
Well, when our honeymoon stage was over with, that's when Christina and I really got to know each other. A little bit about her background, a little bit about my background, and there was a lot of differences right away, what we thought as far as our finances, how we were going to distribute our money. When we did move to California, Christina did very well immediately, and I think I started to feel a little bit insecure of her prosperity, her success, because
in her job.
In her job,
Yeah.
and relationships. She always respected our marriage right away, and I felt like I found myself competing with my own wife and abused that.
And that's pretty typical of men, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
Christina, from your perspective.
You know, I was doing very well with, my career and blossoming. And, the thing is that, Joseph had mentioned earlier about the family of origin, and this is where it comes into play. See, I come from a very rough background. I was raised, by my mom, who's a single mother, and grew up in the projects. So for me, working hard and being able to earn my living was something that was implanted very deep in me because I knew that I wanted to change my life. So being able to prosper with my career was something that became very important to me. It became very, very important to me. And I also became very reliant on Joseph's support. And I wanted to have him praise me for my accomplishments. I wanted him to be there for me. I wanted him to share all of my successes. And I didn't realize that as I was looking for his support, for his praise, for his admiration, I might have been suppressing, his own feelings. I didn't realize that that's what I was doing, but for the longest time, this is exactly what had been happening with us.
Now, you speak of the differences in your family of origin, so you're talking about kind of a socioeconomic, sociological difference with you coming from the projects and you from maybe a more middle-class family, and that had a big impact on how you viewed life and your values and so forth? Or
Yes,
what?
with Christina's background, family is extremely important in terms of being there for one another. Not to say that that's not the way I was raised, but with Christina's background, what I was learning is in time of trouble, regardless of who is accountable for it, you have to remain together very close. Where I had a hard time understanding that, because the way I was raised, in moments of conflict, whether you were accountable or not, it was a little bit more of a harsh type support. If you get yourself into trouble, then you need to get yourself out of it. And the support was very minimal. So it was very hard for me to understand that about Christina, as well as for her to understand my mentality is why I couldn't be as sensitive to some of her family situations. So therefore, that really started with differences. Another thing that I left out was my mother had passed away at a very young age. I was 17 years old, and at that same time, I already had brought a child into this world from in my senior year in high school. And so with the loss of my mother at a young age, and I was looking for some type of acceptance and embracement of just my feelings, period, because that's what mattered to me most were my feelings. So I wanted to be embraced regardless of the situation, and it was something that I didn't realize what I was doing. So it was very hard for me to meet Christina halfway and take accountability for my wrong actions, because it was my feelings, my sensitivity that was important, that I was demanding, because I didn't have that female embracement for the loss of my mother at the age of 17.
And that would be a real wounding experience for anyone, a young man, and so particularly seeking that kind of affirmation, and it would be pretty typical, pretty expected, I think. You said that you were separated the first time. How did that come about, and how did you get reconciled again?
Well, the relationship that I took on shortly after, the woman had called Christina at her place of employment and let her know that my marriage was getting in the way of our relationship. And Christina had, she really didn't have to hear too much. She had heard enough, and she concluded the phone call, and immediately she had relocated back here to El Paso.
So were you aware that this was going on prior to that phone call?
No, I had my gut instinct. I think most women do when we're going through that situation. I knew that something was wrong. Joseph and I have a very interesting relationship. We have had a lot of troubles, but we're also very close. So for example, we have always gone to lunch together, and during that time, I remember he didn't want to go to lunch with me, or he didn't want to rush home, from work in the evenings, and I just knew something was wrong. So when she called, no, I didn't know. I just had a gut feeling. So it didn't catch me totally by surprise. But my personality is that of pride, and so I did not wait for an explanation or to hear more detail or to even ask Joseph if it was true or not. I just simply hung up with her and literally told my boss that I was going back home. I explained to him the situation, and drove back to his grandmother's house, which is where we were living at the time, packed up my stuff and left. No phone call, no nothing. And so it was a pretty impulsive reaction, and I'm not sure if that's typical of women that go through something like that. It probably, I'm sure, has a lot to do with my personality and the way that I handle conflict. And
the shortly after that, I mean, of course, I wasted no time. My sense of urgency to fight for my marriage was, it was the highest expectation.
So somehow that action made you take stock of the situation.
Absolutely. If I'm not mistaken, the night after the phone call, I flew to El Paso to speak with Christina. I know that there was at some point an explanation, some type of talk would have to have taken place. So for me, it was important that it happened a lot sooner than later. So we were only separated for maybe about a couple of days. And then we reunited, and then I brought Christina back to El Paso. Or so, excuse me, back to California.
Back to California, And then what did you try to do in order to heal the marriage and so forth after that time frame?
I think just the fact that, of course we were in love, I know that, and I know Christina will share, but for me it was just, getting my wife back and then kind of picking up where we left off prior to the experience. And just kind of replace the bad times with good times, whether it be entertainment with friends or just alone time with each other. But now that I look back and we fast forward, 15 years later, I know that even just starting the healing process, it wasn't done correctly on my part.
And you know, I have to say the same thing. You know, we did try our very best because we have never stopped being in love with each other, but we have done a lot to hurt each other. And so you know, the problem with my contribution is, and it's hard even today to admit to it, is that I never let go of my unforgiveness for him. And for the rest of the time, no matter what he did right, I never really gave him full credit. But what I did do is that anything that went wrong was his fault. My entire misery was always his fault. Financial problems, whatever that had to do with our relationship may or may not have been related to that incident, was judged differently from my part. And I became very one-sided.
So you were really looking at it through a different lens that was not a healthy lens.
And that
the
is
lens
correct.
of unforgiveness. Okay. And then you actually separated a couple more times, is that right?
Yeah, we spent another, I would have to say, 4 years in Southern California, and you know, we just kind of went as the days went, and work occupied our time and distracted us. Shortly after, I know that Christina's mom and younger brother had made a move to Southern California, so we had things to distract us from what had happened in the past. And as Christina said, that anything negative was because of my actions. But there were certainly a lot of distractions, and we eventually moved to Phoenix, Arizona. In Phoenix, Arizona, we spent another almost 4 years there as well. In Phoenix, we had the arrival of our first child, and we ended up leaving Phoenix. That was our second separation. Christina was going through a time where she was pregnant with our second child, and she had lost a very dear family member, her grandfather, who was her father figure. That's basically who had raised her as a child. So at that time, it was very emotional. I know Christina had, you know, the pregnancy was unexpected with her second child. She was about to return to work from our first child, and the dear loss of her grandfather. At that time, I didn't show a whole lot of empathy for the loss of her grandfather. And again, it has somewhat to go back to my background. I know that when my mother passed away, there wasn't a whole lot of what I felt, at least. It was more like, you're on your own now, you got to grow up. So death experiences, the way it seemed like I treated it, seemed to be a little bit insensitive. Of course, that had an effect with Christina, and I think she was starting to evaluate, exactly who she was married to. First, years back, the infidelity, now the loss of my grandfather, and it doesn't seem like I have much of a support system. And shortly after that, that was our second separation.
How did well, let's hear from your perspective, and then I'll ask my question. Christina.
Again, going back to the fact that I had created an image of what I thought my husband should be, what my husband should be for me. And, it was a misperception. I have to accept that today. But when my grandfather passed away, he was my father figure. He was my dad. So I expected my husband to be there for me. I wanted to lean on his shoulder. Instead, I was pregnant, and my grandfather was in Juarez. So at that time, I was spending nights in the hospital, sleeping in my truck, wanting to make sure that I was with him till the last breath. And I was there till his last breath. But I was very resentful at the fact that, Joseph didn't make it a priority to be with me by my side. And I was very hurt by that. It was unfair in my part, now that I look back, because of the fact that we had a difficult financial situation at that time, and he had just gotten a job, and the job required for him to travel, and he happened to be in Seattle at that time and didn't have the means to be able to fly over to Mexico for the one-day event, because once he passed away, this was going to move very quickly. That's the way it usually happens in Mexico. But I didn't want to consider any of that. And the only thing I saw probably has to do again with the fact that I had already created a certain perception of my husband based on the deception I had early on. Yeah. But I was not tolerant of that, and my observation was that of disappointment, and can I really rely on this man? Can he be there for me in the difficult moments? I don't think this is what I want for my future.
You know, it's interesting. Christina has mentioned that I was in a job transition. What I had done within our last year in California, going into our relocation to Phoenix, Arizona, I was actually a contractor for a carrier. And it was the first time I did any type of labor type position. When Christina met me, I was always in suits and ties, and I think that's one of the things that she admired about me. When I made a career change, and this continues on the insecurity that I started to feel in year number 1 of our marriage. And the reason actually, and I was very fortunate, I was very blessed with the carrier that I worked for, but because I was starting to feel intimidated, Christina was, you know, in her atmosphere, it was how she met me, you know, being around guys in ties and suits, and I was looking at myself and I was starting to measure myself on appearance. Yeah. So I felt that I was losing her, so the decision was made, and it was a sacrifice, and it was actually, financially, it was probably a bad decision on my part. And so the example is that the decision that I made due to my insecurities. So it was important to me to get back into a suit and tie, which caused a job transition, which also took a financial sacrifice as well.
The thing that's interesting in talking with the two of you is I've talked to a number of couples who've had troubled marriages, and both of you seem to take full responsibility for your actions and attitudes in quite an insightful way, which is not typical. So is that something that has developed over time, or was that something that you had at that time?
And we won't even take the credit for it. You know, that really is the ministry that you had mentioned earlier, Retrovi, which is what really provided us the hope, the tools, the inspiration, a relationship with our Lord, which is what really saved our marriage. We would not have been able to be at the point where we're at if it wasn't for that ministry. Which is the reason why shortly after, you know, finishing our own retreat, we made the decision to answer the calling to serve on the ministry, because that is exactly what the ministry teaches us, is that we have to stop doing this and look more at what did I do to contribute to the deterioration of our relationship. And today we still have our issues. You know, there is no such thing, I think, as a perfect relationship, but we definitely have a much healthier relationship. And the first thing that we were able to do was allow our relationship to be a relationship of 3. That's Joseph, myself, and God. Yeah. And that is what has allowed us to be at this point today.
Yeah. And in the previous 14 years before our weekend retreat, as Christina mentions, that's what we were doing. We were fighting to see who was going to be in the driver's seat, who was going to control the relationship. We always have had faith. We always had the same beliefs, but prayer and attending church or Mass was just, it was an occasion. It was an occasion for Thanksgiving, for holidays, basically. And you know, as I mentioned to you in 2010, when we made the decision to finally agree to go our separate directions, that's when Christina received information from a coworker, and we went. And as Christina mentions, you know, 2 years later, we're still, you know, working on it. But the difference was that we, as Christina said, you know, we decided to make, you know, God a part of our equation, and you know, it's provided us a lot of tools, but more than anything, it was our commitment, a new commitment.
That understanding of covenant relationship, which Retrovi does such a great job of. You know, my husband and I have attended Retrovi, and we found it to be very profound, and we've recommended it and many members of our church have also attended, and they found it to be the thing that essentially transformed their marriages, and there have been some pretty significant problems as well. The thing that I was wondering was, so you would say that you were Christians, or not really, kind of a nominal Christians prior to attending Retrovi? How would you have described your faith and your relationship with God prior to that?
God wasn't in the center of our household. I mentioned to you that I had a daughter at the age of 17, so she's now 20. Even though being a part-time father, I really never was the example of living a Christian life. We have 2 children together. One's 9, the other's 7. And in their first years of their lives, we really weren't practicing our faith within the household. up until that weekend. But prior to that, yes, we just really never practiced, our faith, or we were not very good ambassadors or examples of our faith. We would occasionally attend Mass or service, but we weren't really practicing or acting, of our faith up until we made the decision that it's very important, and we committed to that in September of 2010.
And so you kind of entered into what one might describe as a personal relationship with
That's
Christ,
right.
where he was the third person in your marriage. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's correct.
Now, do you have to be a Christian to go to Retrovi?
No.
It is a Catholic-based foundation from the ministry, but there are couples of all faiths and all religions that attend the program. There is no religious-driven, push throughout the program. It is a faith-based program, and I think that's what's key. It is a faith-based program because we do talk about without that piece of the equation, we don't think that it will work.
Yeah.
We need to emphasize that.
Right.
But it's a personal relationship with God, not a religious.
It's not a religious
right.
sectarian program.
That's correct.
What about, how did you guys feel about each other in the low points of your marriage? Did you hate one another or despise each other? How would you describe the depth of the negative feelings that you had, so that people might be able to see that where God has you now, so to speak?
Well, it's funny because the week of the conversation that we had when we decided that maybe going a different direction would be best, I had a talk with Christina one Saturday morning. The previous night we had got together with some friends, and it didn't go so well for us. And when I woke up the next morning, I said, I'm going to have a conversation with my wife because I think I need to expose and share some feelings. And what that was is I had let Christina know that, I know that I love you, but I don't think I like you anymore. And I was waiting for, I don't know, a shoe to be thrown at me or something. But, Christina, she related. And she goes, I believe I know exactly what you mean. And we talked about the difference between liking and loving, and I felt that it was very important that I like my wife. Can I have a good time with my wife? Do I want to be around my wife? And we know that we didn't like our situation, the arguing, and we did agree. We did admit that we were still in love with each other. There's still an attraction, but there's definitely void, and that void is that we don't like several things that were taking place. And those were my feelings, when I had finally admitted to Christina about the difference for me between love and like.
I think for me, when we hit that point, it was a misery state point. It was hard for me to be able to find peace, and I yearned for that peace, a peace that I have today, and I'm very thankful for and very grateful for. Before, my temperament was at a very high level and very uncontrollable. I actually, believe it or not, I'm the aggressive one in the relationship. I have a very, very ugly way of expressing my anger towards my husband. Or I should better correct myself, I had a very ugly way. And it was very hurtful. But I think it's all tied back to the misery state that I was in. I just was not happy. I was not happy. When we finally made that transition in our lives, the best thing that could have happened to me was the peace that I found, and I find it through prayer. Till today, one of the things that I do is I started reading books. A lot of the couples that I've met, through our journey, have been blessings in our path, and they've gifted me things like the book of The Power of a Praying Wife.
Oh yeah,
I read that book. It
Yeah.
calms me down. It helps me see my husband with different eyes.
Sure.
And it's a beautiful book, as you said, you've
Yeah.
read it before, so it's...
I actually give that book to all couples for a wedding gift. I give Power of Praying Wife and a Power of a Praying Husband. Yeah, because I think it's that important.
It is.
Yeah, the thing that is so amazing is that you get to that point, and then somehow God does provide you with a tool or an opportunity. But I hear a lot of couples say, and you see this on TV and in movies, where people say, well, we just don't love each other anymore. So you guys at least, quote unquote, loved one another, even though you didn't like each other. There are couples out there who say, we don't love each other anymore. So, I mean, what do you say to that?
Well, you know, it's funny. I don't know if an analogy, and I shared this on a continued program that we have every Wednesday. I had shared with the group that my 9-year-old boy, you know, he insists that he wants his dog, his puppy. He wants it, he wants it, he wants it, but he doesn't want to put in the work. And for me, you know, when I had realized that I didn't want to put on the work, you know, I just wanted it magically to happen. You know, I wanted things with my wife to magically get better, but I didn't want to put any work into it. I know that I wanted my marriage. I know I wanted it to work. I know that I wanted to, you know, remain attractive and in love with my wife. But what was I doing on my part to put in the work on my behalf to keep that there?
Well, if you, let's say you weren't, and I'm sure you've run across couples who maybe weren't quote unquote attracted anymore.
You know, one of the
What
things.
about that?
Well, you know.
I mean, I know that wasn't your situation, but I know you've encountered a number of couples.
And it might have been, you know, if we would have allowed it to get to that level, because we were very well in that direction, you know, to be able to say we just don't love each other anymore.
Right.
And one of the things that we learned through the ministry is that love is not really a feeling. Love is a decision. It is a decision that we make every single day. We make the decision. I make the decision to love him. And so I need to love him through the good and the bad. And it's a decision that we make. And that's what really ties into, are you willing to put in the work for it? Because it is a decision, just like forgiveness is. You either decide to forgive and move forward, or you decide not to.
Is there a point at which a marriage is beyond hope? Again, you've seen a lot of marriages. I've seen a lot of marriages that are maybe alcoholism, abuse, drug addiction, that kind of thing. What are the stories of the couples that come out of Retrovi? Are there marriages where there's such an extreme and people are divorced, it's all over, or is any marriage beyond hope?
You know, as long as you have God in the equation, in my opinion, I don't believe so. I believe people feel like they reached that point, but we've met so many couples where they haven't spoken to their spouse in a year. And they come one week and their spouse shows up right next by their side. So I believe through the power of prayer, through the grace of God, we haven't seen you know, that yet, you know, where, you know, people have fought and they've just resorted back to their faith.
Now, the one thing that I will say, though, is that when there is physical abuse, that is not something that we encourage. And so if we have a couple that is in a violent relationship, we don't encourage that. And we're not professionals by any means, and so we're very clear about also making sure that the couples understand that. But when it comes to physical violence, that's something that's a little bit out of our league, and maybe something where they've reached a point where.
Well, thank you very much for being with us. You've been wonderful and transparent, and we really appreciate that. Is your marriage troubled, or do you know a couple who needs help? The good news is there is hope. Let us know how this program has helped you by contacting us on Facebook, our website, or Twitter. Thank you so much for watching.